He had nothing. No home, no family, nor even a suitable jacket to protect from the mountain chili. However, Gideon Nash discovered he saw the bleeding girl fall to the ground in the snow, made the decision to bring 30 armed within hours. Warriors were at his door. What he believed to be straightforward kindness was ready to light something far more hazardous than he had ever thought. The wind ripped through the delicate fabric of Gideon's shabby clothing while ascending the rough slope with cramps in his gut from hunger. 3 days without an appropriate meal, and winter was rapidly approaching, surrounding the summits of the mountains. At 16, he discovered how to live off of scraps and resolve, but the storm that is coming threatening to put even his toughest resilience. A splatter of red against he froze in the beautiful snow, blood, new blood. Gideon followed the shadowy trail, found her, a young indigenous girl. Perhaps he was too old, bleeding and unconscious from her legs severe cut. The buckskin garment had been ripped, and frost had formed on her dark hair already. She couldn't stay like this for another hour. Chilly, all of his instincts begged him to leave. Participating in tribal problems signified trouble, the kind that became slaughtered settlers or worse. However, as something was staring at her pallid face, more than just survival took over. Unable to, he whispered, "Just leave you here," kneeling next to her. She shifted while his dark eyes as he touched her shoulder, open with unexpected terror. Her hand sprang to infirmity, but a bone knife at her belt made her motions awkward. "Easy," Gideon held up his hands. "I desire to assist." She talked quickly in her native language, indicating the eastern summits. Despite the language barrier, he realized she had to get home quickly. The young woman attempted to rise but instantly fell, sobbing out as her wounded leg gave way. Gideon seized her before she could fall. She could feel her skin getting colder. They were getting hypothermic, those peaks. He asked, pointing east, "That's Dead Man's Pass for 2 days." She frantically nodded while the tears froze. Gideon glanced at her cheeks, his meager supplies, hardly enough food to winter himself, and no medical supplies equipment with more holes than cloth. Navigating the mountains with her would probably murder them both, but abandoning her would undoubtedly kill her here. He answered softly, "Yes, we go together, perhaps not at all." Over the following 18 hours, Gideon dragged and carried the girl across terrain that might confront seasoned mountain guides, slipped in and out of awareness, murmuring unintelligible words but sensed in his bones. Fervent intercession, perhaps, or cautions. When they eventually arrived at the boundary of her tribe territory, she was able to stand by herself. Put a tiny object into his hand. Chiseled stone, then vanishing into the woodland without turning around. Gideon staggered back to his cave in the mountains as when daybreak came, he was alive but exhausted. Done the correct thing, even if it almost murdered him. However, when he got closer to his refuge, his blood began to flow. Chilly, with plenty of hoof prints all around his cave. New impressions. And etched onto the tree next to his door was he had never seen such a symbol before. 3 an arrow crosses parallel lines. Someone knew that someone had been here. Gideon knew exactly where to look for him. Walked around his cave 3 times previously. Coming in, his hand never left. At his belt was a rusted knife. The hoof prints told him a narrative he was unwilling to read. All 15 or more horses were shot in. The unique look he'd noticed on tribal horses. They had been waiting for hours, examining his little possessions, discovering his habits. Within the cave, everything appeared just as he had left it. But something didn't feel right. The sleeping blanket was recently shifted. A little, but sufficient for someone who understood every strand of his few belongings. His tiny pot for boiling sat from a different perspective. Even his assemblage of polished river stones had been agitated. They searched for things, he said in a whisper to the vacant cave. However, what could he have? What would soldiers desire? He had nothing worthwhile. No weapons, no gold worth stealing, no details regarding movements of settlers. Unless his fingers discovered the girl's engraved stone into his hand. During the day he could plainly see it. Black that has been polished, deep-carved rock with elaborate symbols into its exterior. It was cozy up against his flesh. Nearly alive, a branch broke off. Outside, Gideon stopped. Each and every muscle tensing. It wasn't wind. Something. Dead wood has been stepped on by heavy. Something is making an effort to move silently, yet failing. Looking through an opening in the rocks, his heart almost stopped. 3 soldiers sat still atop their horses, observing his cave from 30 yards distant. Conflict, their cheeks were streaked with paint, and eagle, their black hair was decorated with feathers. His eyes never left his hiding spot. He was inside, and they knew it. How much time have they been awaiting? How did they discover him so fast? The girl was unable to inform them. She had hardly been awake. When they parted ways, one warrior stood up. Somewhere behind Gideon's hand and horses whinnied quietly in the cave. Additional cyclists, they were all around him. The warrior dismounted slowly and methodically, holding a tomahawk in his hand that it seems to have tasted blood lately. His voice when he talked carried through the slender mountain with ease. Who assisted our daughter, boy? We recognize you." Gideon's throat dried up. Daughter, the young woman was. Someone significant? Not merely any member of the tribe, but to whoever these folks were, they were family. "Come on out, we want to talk." Each and every fiber of Gideon's screaming peril. In all the tales he had heard, white guys who became embroiled in tribal matters and eventually worse, like being scalped. However, he was confined, like an unoccupied rabbit in a den run and the approach of winter. The combatant continued with a hint of abrasiveness in his voice. That gave Gideon the chills. "You've something that is ours." The engraved his palm felt as though the stone was burning. This thing, whatever it was sufficient importance to send armed soldiers into the mountains. Enough importance to monitor. He was taken out in a matter of hours. Gideon shut his eyes, experiencing the strain of his choice. Go outside and confront whatever these fighters wanted to remain inconspicuous and ultimately perish from cold and dehydration. When he was confined to the cave by winter, his eyes opened, and the warrior was approaching his cave entrance, as well as his face indicated that patience was no longer in choice. Stepping out of the cave, Gideon lifting his hands, the engraved stone concealed within his clenched fist, 30 fighters emerged from behind woods and rocks, like shadows becoming more substantial. More males, more armed than he had anticipated, all observing him with facial expressions that was unable to read. The front runner halted 5 feet distant, near enough for Gideon to could see the detailed markings of the scars his grizzled face. This wasn't typical hunting group. These were experienced combatants, and their presence meant something far more serious than a straightforward rescue. "My name is Takakata." The warrior spoke in a measured English. "Ayana is my daughter." Gideon's lips became parched. A leader's he had rescued the daughter of a chief, without being aware of it, and now her dad had enough soldiers in front of him to level a tiny town, she informed me. "You did." Continuing, Takakata's dark Gideon's gaze never left his face. "How you kept her warm throughout the bitter cold. While you had the option to leave?" The other fighters said nothing. However, Gideon sensed their tension as power before to a storm. One mistake, one misinterpreted gesture, one phrase, and this discussion would come to a very in a different way. Anybody would have carried out the Gideon was able to do the same. However, his voice broke the words. The Takakota, the change in expression was barely noticeable. "No, most people wouldn't. Most people also dread us. Too much to risk assisting." He pointed to his men. "We've been searching for the folks who assaulted our camp. 3 armed settlers. They shot my daughter with firearms when she attempted to caution them about our hallowed territory." Gideon sensed ice accumulating in his abdomen. Settlers, white dudes enjoy him. Guys who might think he was at work alongside them. "We located them at your," Takakota's voice said, "mountain," becoming more difficult. "Their path led straight beyond your cave." We believe that maybe he left the sentence open-ended. However, the Gideon was hit by the implication like a physical assault. They had been suspicious about taking part in the assault. However, Ayana outlined the boy who came to her rescue. Takakota went on. Slender, ravenous, with soft hands and kind eyes, not the account of a man who massacres women. Gideon felt a wave of relief, yet it was brief. If these fighters were pursuing armed settlers within his domain, soon blood would be shed. And when territorial officials arrived in search of answers, they would track him down, the sole white local face. The men your Gideon responded cautiously, hunting. Takakota nodded and said, "They're still up here." Sternly, "Get close, very near." They produced camp below in the valley, believing they are secure. He reached for his "they are wrong." Tomahawk younger fighters talked quickly in their native language, indicating the valley. Takakota's face grew serious. "What is it?" he asked.